guys, today we're going to talk about how to edit a portrait, specifically a portrait that was shot in a studio setting where there's a mixture of natural light as well as artificial light. So in this case, I'm going to open up the photo as a smart object in Photoshop. Usually I process my raw photos through Lightroom, so when I've selected the one I really like, I just right click and select open in Photoshop as smart object. And so this is what we get here. And so one thing that I really like to do when I first start is I'm going to double click on the little icon for the smart object, and that will bring up this following screen. So for a camera raw, you can make a lot of these adjustments in Lightroom in the beginnings. What I suggest is doing all of that after the fact. So once you're done with all your Photoshop edits, then you're gonna save it and it will open up in Lightroom, where you can then do some more color grading, that sort of thing. But that's my personal preference. But the main thing I want to use a camera raw for is changing the color profile. So the default is Adobe Color, which is what we see here. But if you want to see more options, you can go on Browse. And then it will pull up a window with a bunch of options. So Adobe Color is generally pretty good. I also really recommend Landscape, which gives you a little bit more of a saturated bump, as you can see the difference. And this is all personal preference. It's the basis of how you're gonna edit your photo. And another really good place to look is in camera matching. And so here you can see all of your different options. Portrait is typically a pretty good one. It makes it a little bit brighter, airier, a little creamier. Neutral is a little bit more of a desaturated view. But the rest, it's really up to what your preference is. And so in this case, I'm gonna use the Adobe Landscape version just because it gives your skin a little bit more dimension. And the great thing about this is as we do the rest of our edits, we can easily bump down certain saturations, but I feel like this brings out her midtones a little bit better. So in that case, I'm just gonna click Adobe Landscape and then press OK. And then it's gonna prepare the smart object for you. And the great thing about working with smart objects is that if I decide later on, I really don't like this color format, I can easily just double click and do the same exact process so that I can update. And you really want to be able to work non-destructively with your photos so that if you're delivering these to a client and the client says this doesn't quite match our idea for these photos, then you can easily go through because you're working non-destructively and make the necessary changes, and your original file will be untouched. And so, as you can see, now we have our color profile as landscape. It's a little more punchier. And then what I really like to do is go in and create a new layer, and I'm going to relabel this as skin. And then here, we want to be able to click the little healing brush tool, and this will allow us to be able to work on the below layers if we have the current and below selected up here in the sample. And so what I want to do is, this is a really good photo to show you some of your typical editing that you'll have to do. But as you can see, there's a bunch of little hairs, there's a couple little beauty marks. And so what we're going to do is we're going to go through and we're just going to clean those up. So I personally like using the healing brush because in a way it still allows you to use the same texture as the source, and also helps blend it in a little bit better so it looks a lot more realistic compared to the stamp tool. And the stamp tool is better if you want to, for instance, add more freckles, or your shirt you need to adjust and have a hard line on it. So they have very different uses. I do use them sometimes interchangeably, but my favorite is this one that we currently have. So I'm going to make this a little bit bigger so that way I can be able to fix the skin that is being affected by the hair. So that should be good. You still want to be small enough to where it's a little less noticeable for whenever you do end up making these changes. So I'm going to start off and I'm going to select an area just above it, and it is going to go through and update. So the thing about this one is it's going to go back to wherever your original source is, while the stamp tool is going to just follow along in relation to where yours is. So we're going to start off up here again, and we're going to go through and just clean up. So as you can see, this can take a really, really long time. So I'm just going through and doing my best to do a little bit more like a rougher edit, so that way I have a really good starting point to be able to make some other more fine-tuned adjustments. That I would like to do is I'm gonna clean up with some dodging and burning, and so to help we're going to create a couple of layers. So the first one is going to be our curves layer. In this case, you want to click up here in the highlights where the box is, and you're going to bring it a lot of the way up, and you don't want it to affect the whole image. We're going to paint it on. And so what we do is, if you're in a Mac, you're going to press Command-I, but essentially you're going to inverse the layer. And then we're going to relabel this as our dodge layer. And then we're going to make another layer, but we're going to do the opposite, and we're going to bring it down quite a bit and inverse it, and we're going to label it burn. And so what this enables us to do is we're only going to paint over the parts of our picture that we want to be affected by this layer. And so to help us know where to paint over, we're going to make a hue saturation curve, and we're going to bring down the saturation all the way. And this will help us show the lights and darks in our picture. And so sometimes to help with the dodge layer, we want to bring down the lightness quite a bit just to see what our brightest parts of our picture are. And then we're going to paint over those to accentuate them, so we can create a little bit of a dimension between the different areas of our picture. So we're going to make sure the dodge layer is selected, and then we're going to select our brush tool. And you're going to want it to be white and black here for our two color options. And the white is what's going to show up on the page where we're painting over. And then if we switch it over to black, it's essentially going to act as an eraser in terms of taking it away. And so we can see a lot of our highlights are here, here, and along our cheekbone. And so we also want to check the body, so it's going to be over here, and that's about it. And so maybe even some of the hair. And what we want to do is we're going to bring this up a little bit more so we can get a little bit more surface area. And in this case, since this isn't like a paid project or anything, and it is a portrait where it's a little bit more expanded out, then we don't have to go into super, super tiny detail. But if this was a beauty client, then yes, we're gonna have to really go in there with a really small brush size and make those like line by line as if we're painting edits. And so what we're gonna do is we're gonna zoom in to the parts that we wanna affect. And we wanna lower the opacity. And I like to work between 5 and 10%. So I'm just going to put it at 8 for now, and this will allow us to build upon these edits over time so it's not super overpowering. We're just going to literally go over and paint over the parts that we see are brighter than the rest, and this will allow us to essentially dodge those areas with this brush. Okay, and so we're going to take this layer off and kind of just toggle through, and you can see it's a lot more smooth out, it's a little bit more even, still looks pretty natural, and there's a little bit more of a focus on her face. And so the next step that we're going to do is we're going to do the burning, and we're going to make sure our hue saturation, we want to bring up the lightness to a little bit more where it originally would be, maybe a little bit higher, just to kind of see where those like really dark spots or discoloration spots are, and then as well as see where the dark spots are that we want to darken to create more of that dimension. How it helps to see the overall effect you've had on your photo is you want to group all of your layers into right here, and you're just going to toggle between what you have done and your original. As you can see, it gives a little more of a dimension, it's a little bit like more of a punch to it, it's a lot more cleaned up, and it still looks pretty natural to me. Okay. And so we're going to expand this out again. We don't want to do the hue saturation curve or layer anymore, so I just end up deleting it, just so we can clean up and make sure our editing area is down to what we're actually using. So the next thing that I like to do is I'm going to do selective color edits. And this kind of overall affects the different colors within your image. But I like to start off with the neutrals and go from there. And I want to give her a little bit more dimension still. So in my neutrals, I'm going to go to blacks, and you can see how it affects the overall image. And I'm going to do just like at a level 2, just to give it a little bit of a, so you can it's barely noticeable. In this case, I think the photo is a little too greenish yellow, and so I'm just going to play around with the 3 different sliders to kind of just get it to where I want it to be. And you want to make subtle changes. So as you can see, I made it like a little bit darker, a little punchier, a little more dramatic, just so you can really see the difference between midtones, highlights, and the shadows of our image. So overall, this is really good. And then from here on out, I might clean up a little bit of the hair up here just to make it a little bit more clean, a little more professional. So I'm going to create a separate layer. I'm going to zoom in, and I'm going to use the stamp tool for this one. I'm going to bring it up to like 80. That way it still looks realistic. And I'm going to bring this up a little bit more too, so it can affect more at once. And so from here, I'll be like, okay, I like where this is. This looks pretty clean. So I'm just going to save it down. And then from here, it's gonna save as a TIFF. Typically, if you're opening it from Lightroom directly, then you can, once you save it, it will save a copy in Lightroom for you, but I open this separately. So then I'm just going to go into Lightroom, open up Lightroom Classic, and open up this photo. So I'm going to go into and develop it. I already have similar edits done here, so I'm just going to do like a little quick copy and paste just to see how effective be, and that is honestly pretty effective. I'm going to compare, and it's got a little more of pink, so I'm going to show you what these edits look like. Essentially what we went through and it is bring up the exposure a little bit, just because it still felt a little dark. And in this case, I might even bring down the highlights just to see what it would look like. It's a little too much. So in that case, I might end up bringing the whites down in case it's feeling a little too contrasty. Yes, so in this case, I'm going to bring it down just a smidgen for the whites, which affect overall the brightness of the photo. And then I'm going to bring up my highlights a little bit just to compensate. So you can see it's a little bit more effective already. It's a little bit more evened out. As for my shadows, I'm just going to bring them down just to see what the overall effect would be. And it's a little bit too much, but I'm bringing it down just a smidgen as well. And I think my blacks overall are in a really good spot, so I'm just going to not touch it. So we can see the before and after. It's a little bit more of a natural looking tone. Before it was a little bit too on the greenish side, and this is all personal preference, but this is just kind of how I like to see it. And in this case, all I went down is I did the split toning, and this is more of like where it's your filter, I guess, that you would have, and this is more of your personal style. But I made the highlights a little bit more of like a orangey pinkish color, because before they were a little too green, as you can see, and it just didn't feel very natural. and this kind of warmed it up a little bit, and I just brought up saturation just a little bit. And for my shadows, I kind of wanted to even it out a little bit as well, and it's more of like this reddish, pinkish effect, and it's just up a little bit. So I'll show you before and after. And in this case, all what's really left to do is we're just going to crop it, and this is all personal preference as well. For Instagram, it's just going to be your typical 4x5. Bring it down, and then I'm just going to make sure you don't see the rest of the backdrop. And voila! And that is your final product, and this is the before and after. So if you guys like this video, I know it was a little bit long, but this goes through my overall way of editing a portrait. It's a little bit more detailed than editing a regular lifestyle photo, but it's not nearly as detailed as doing a beauty shot. And so this is generally how you clean up your photo, how you give it a little bit more of a dimension, make it bring some brightness back to it, as well as color correcting and split toning in a way that you see fit. If you like this video, let me know in the comments, share with your friends, save it down for later. I will be making more videos to come, so hopefully you guys like this, and I can't wait to see you again. Bye!